Actually, there's a lot that they have in common. But the one that be quiet, oh my gosh. The one that I think is pretty often said, at least in my experience. I had a dog when I was in middle school. It was a silky terrier. It was a whole 10 pounds of nonsense. It was like this big. It was such a small dog. It's a silky terrier, which means it was gray as a puppy. It looked like an old man as a baby. And so this dog had an infatuation, an obsession with used tissues. And it would pull them out of the trash can, run under a little table, and just gnarl away at the tissues. And I don't know how many of you, maybe you've not been in that scenario, but I found that my entire relationship with this dog was crawling under a coffee table, grabbing its jaw and being like, leave it, leave it, leave it, right? As it bit my finger, right? I walked away with bloody, with like a soaked tissue. Like, ah. Now, I don't have dogs anymore. Instead, I've had babies. And babies do a similar thing, where they also eat anything that they find on the floor. They'll eat mulch. They'll eat toys. Yesterday, I pulled out of my baby's mouth a 2-day-old dry pasta piece. Like my baby came crawling out from under the dining room table with what looked like a cigarette. It was a dry piece of pasta. And you know what you do in that moment? You go, no, leave it! Get that out of here. This is not good for you. This is not good for you. This morning, I want to talk to us about things that we should leave behind. Things that we should leave behind. Specifically, spiritual things we should leave behind. And there's a book that we're going to look at this week and next week, and it's called the book of Hosea. How many of you have heard of the book of Hosea in the Bible? Okay, some of you have. So if you didn't know this, it's a book in the Bible. And then it's a book about God's desire and care to be with you and spend time with you. It's about how much He loves you and cares for you. And kind of like a good dog owner or a good parent, there's moments where He's going to say, leave it. And it's good to listen. Before we get any further in this message, let's take a few minutes in our tag groups and talk, and then we'll be back. There's probably some things that you don't leave the house without. I make sure that everywhere I go, I've got keys, I've got my phone, I've got my wallet. There's things, my backpack, if you were here last service, there's things that I don't leave without. But have you ever left without someone that you were not supposed to leave without? This is going to be a really honest conversation. These are called my confessions. This is a judgment-free zone. I'm about to share a story with you that you are not allowed to think less of me for. So years ago, as a JVOX pastor, I took JVOX after church on a Sunday to Sky Zone. We went to Sky Zone. We took everybody. I didn't pay for it. Somebody was like, "That's expensive." You paid for it. But we took everybody to Sky Zone, and JVoxers got to go hang out, and then at the end we were carpooling with all of our leaders back to the church, and one of my leaders decided to he left a little early, and he ended up taking some of his friends, and I got a call on our way back to the church, and somebody goes, "Hey, where's Ian?" And I was like, Ian's with Jacob." "No, he's not. Ian's still here at Sky Zone." And I was like, "Excuse me?" They're like, "Yeah, Ian is still at Sky Zone." Oh, no. And do you know what's actually, this is crazy. This is crazy. JR, are you in here? Yeah, JR, your dad was the one who called me and was like, "I'll bring Ian home." But I left a student behind. Now, in all fairness, here's the deal. Ian was actually left by his brother Jacob, who decided to take his high school friends home and left his brother at Sky Zone. But it was my responsibility. And can I tell you, there's nothing scarier than leaving someone behind who should be with you. Have any of you ever left someone behind? Oh, Caleb, with that, oh no. It is a terrifying, terrifying feeling. You know what doesn't affect us as much, though, is when we leave someone out. But do you know who that does affect? The person that you left out. Now, you would know what that's like if you were ever the person who was left out. You know what it feels like to not be invited to sit at the lunch table. You know what it's like for somebody to pass out invitations and skip you. You know what it's like when you find out that your friends did something together and no one invited you. You get that feeling. None of us like being left out. But Hosea does something in this book of the Bible that I think is really interesting. Many of us can recognize what it feels like to be left behind, to be left out. But the book of Hosea is about what happens when we've left God out. I don't know if you recognize this, but did you know that God can feel left out? In Hosea chapter 2, verse 8, God, he's talking to his people, and he says, "She doesn't realize it was I, God, who gave her everything she has. Grain, new wine, olive oil, silver, and gold. But she gave all of my gifts to Baal." Now, you might not know this. Baal was a popular other religion at that time, and people worship Baal. In fact, one of the things that they would do is when things were going well, they would stop worshiping God and they would start to worship Baal, because Baal was all of these like specific things that they felt like were working for them. Like Baal was the god of rain, and so every time it would rain, they would thank Baal for the rain. And Baal had all these other gods under him. And so when the harvest came, they would thank the Baal of the harvest. And when they had peace in their land, they would thank the Baal of peace. And we go, how dare they treat God like that? But I think it's pretty easy to do something similar. Ultimately, what God is saying here is that they left him out of their thanks. And I think it's pretty easy for us to leave God out of our thanks. I think it's pretty easy for some of us to go weeks without ever saying, thanks, God. I think it's probably pretty easy for us to go a really long time without being able to say, God, thank you for this specifically. God, thank you for my parents. God, thank you for this happiness. God, thank you for the things that I have. God, thank you for my food. God, thank you for my bed. God, thank you for my little sister. And I know I kind of hate her sometimes, but thanks anyway. God, thank you for, God, thank you. And God says one of the things that his people can do sometimes is they leave him out of their thanks. I find a good example of this. One of my kids right now is obsessed with a game called Stumble Guys. Has anybody heard of Stumble Guys? If you haven't heard of Stumble Guys, it's Fall Guys, but free. So, Fall Guys is free. So I don't understand why Stumble Guys exists. But here's the deal. Here's the deal. My kids can play Stumble Guys for hours. In fact, if there was no end to that, I'm pretty sure they could go an entire week without looking up. And when they're done, all I hear them talk about is, oh my gosh, it's so amazing. I got this new character, and he's got this new skin, and it's amazing. It's amazing. And then when I was on the thing, and we had this challenge, and I was on the, and I jumped, and then I got, and they talk about it over and over and over. Do you know why? Because you talk about the things that you love, and God's going, do you love me? Because I haven't heard you talk about me. And God says, I feel left out. He says, in Hosea 6:4, he says, your love vanishes like the morning mist and disappears like dew in the sunlight. Your love vanishes like the morning mist, disappears like the dew. Now, here's what's really, really cool. Almost every single morning this week, there's been fog outside. There's been mist outside. Driving home a couple nights this week, there's been this fog outside, and as I'm driving, I'm reminded of this thing that you never see afternoon fog. Right? You don't see afternoon dew because you live in one of the hottest, most terrible heat index places on planet Earth. It sucks up all the moisture. And so we live in a hot place. By the afternoon, it's all gone. All that moisture is gone. And do you know what God says? God says sometimes our love is just like that. Pastor Jonah this morning in his message in there, he shared a common prayer where somebody says, God, I thank you that I have lived perfectly without sin, that I've never hurt anyone, I've never been jealous, I've never been angry, I've never lied, I've never cheated, I've never stolen. Thank you, God, that I'm perfect. But in 2 minutes, I have to get out of bed, and I really need help after that. And here's the deal. Some of us have this kind of relationship with God that's like, man, I'm really good at J-Box. But then the rest of the week, I've forgotten about God. And God says, it looks like your love disappears. It looks like we had something, and then it's gone. And God feels left out. Then in Hosea 7, God says, I wanted to redeem them. And that means bring back. So God says, I want to bring them back, but they have told lies about me. They don't cry out to me with sincere hearts. Instead, they sit on their couches and wail. They cut themselves, begging foreign gods for grain and new wine, and they turn away from me. This is the picture. This is the picture that God sees. And you remember, God sees everything. God sees all of our life. And so God sees this person sitting at home after a really hard day. Really hard day, and it just feels like everything's against them, and the world's mad, and maybe their parents are mad, and they don't have any friends that they could talk to, and it just feels like everything is weighing on them, and they're sitting at home, and they're just sad, or they're mad, or they're hurt, or whatever it is, and they're just sitting in it, and God goes, I'm right here. Will you talk to me? He said, no. They sit on the couch and they cry about it, but not to me. And God's going, I'm right here. But you're leaving me out. Like, I'm right here, but you've left me out. I don't know if you realize this, J-Vox. But God actually really deeply, madly cares about you. God really, truly wants to know you. In fact, in Hosea 6, verse 6, he says, I want you to show love, not offer sacrifices. I want you to know me more than I want burnt offerings. God's saying, I just want to have a connection with you. I want you to love me, and I want to love you. And God goes, that's what I want. I don't know if you realize this, but God is more interested in your life than maybe you thought he was. Maybe you thought that God was only interested that you showed up on Sundays and participated. Maybe you thought that only the thing that God cared about was that you made it through J-Vox. Maybe you thought that only the thing that God cared about was one time you prayed and asked Jesus into your heart. Maybe you thought that that was it, and yet God goes, no, I want to know you.